All right, Brandy, we're going to start with introductions.
Okay, sounds
You
good.
you want to go first or me?
I'll let you go.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Esther Lucero, and I am the CEO for the Seattle Indian Health Board. Here with a good buddy of mine to just have real, honest conversation.
Yeah. First, I just want to say thanks, Esther, for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation. I know we've had them before, and so this is really great. My name is Brandy Grant, and I am the Director of Programming and Advocacy at the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. And so I'm eager to talk.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we're always on Indigenous land, and particularly here in Seattle. Actually, Brandy, I don't know where you are right now, but we will just offer the all-encompassing people of the Salish Seas come from all over this land, and it's very important that we remember that we're always visitors. Like my tribe comes from like a Four Corners area, and so I always speak as a visitor here, and I think it's important that we have the conversation still. One of the things that I like about our relationship is that it really started by talking about, I said, where are all our Black folks at? You said, where are all our Native folks at, right? Because you're from Oklahoma. And I think that was one of the first two sentences we ever said to one another. Is that what you remember?
Yeah, no, 100%. I was just like, I felt comfortable enough to say that to you. I was just like, since I've been here, I hadn't been able to find a strong foothold with the Native community. And, where I grew up and where I'm from, that's ever present all the time. It's embedded in our roots and what we do. And so I was like, where are my people at, right? Like, where, how do I get involved, and how do we build a community together? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's real. And I remember telling you that I'm Dene and Latina, right? And I'm mixed, and I don't know where our Latinx folks are either. I was like, I moved to Seattle from the Bay Area, and I was like, and I feel like I've never felt so brown in my life. I remember saying that. And I think I told you that like one of my first experiences was like my first weekend here, went out to Fremont to that flea market, right? And there's some consignment stores, and I really like to collect mid-century modern furniture, and I was followed around that antique shop. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, because my first career was in retail, and I could see them doing that triangle thing on me. And I remember I was pushing my son in his stroller, and I was like, he's really in here, he's sleeping, and they still followed me around. And I thought, oh man, I need to go back to the Bay, go back to that pink bubble real fast, because it felt weird. Yeah.
I know being here sometimes totally makes you feel that way. My family and I, we've been here for 6 years. And I remember when I would go, like I'm up north. And so when I would go places and I would see Black folks and Native folks, like I would be so overly eager, like, hey, how are you doing? Good morning. And they're like, other folks would be looking and like, why is she so excited? But what was unique in that was the people that I was calling out and saying hello to were just as eager and excited to see me as well.
Yeah.
So it's this shared sense of there are my people, right? And not always feeling like you have to be kind of the, I hate to say odd person out, but, be in places where community sometimes doesn't look like you. And I'm still that way, even to this day. Like, and walked past me the other day in the neighborhood, and he was like, sister, it is so good to see you. Like, and he just like this relief, but it was relief mixed with some level of like contention of like, will we see each other again?
Yeah, right.
Like there's the fear of, and as soon as he walked off, I was like, I hope he's gonna make it to his destination and he will be well, right?
Yeah, that's real, right? And I think it's always ever present, but certainly more heightened today. I don't know if you're moving through the world with a lot more fear, but I feel like I definitely am. I feel like I definitely am. The other thing I remember us talking about is like, we were talking about how here we moved to Seattle, right? It's supposed to be like really progressive from a political perspective. And then we talked about what that progressiveness looks like grounded in whiteness.
Yes. Yeah, and it made me, I don't know about you, but I've learned like all these new phrases and kind of terminology. I feel like this state really over intellectualizes racism in a really overt way. And I remember learning about respectability politics living here, right? Like
Yeah.
very quickly. I was telling somebody the other day, you guys could teach a course.
Yeah.
One DC has nothing on here. But yeah, I do. I remember thinking to myself that it is very, I don't know, it gives me a lot of anxiety. It gives me a lot of anxiety and trepidation. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's real, like intellectualizing racism, intellectualizing just any like kind of talk about oppressive systems, you know. I have no problem with like using appropriate language, right? And trying to be respectful.
right.
But I want to make sure that our actions, you know, are lined up with our talk. And that's one of the reasons, like, I, you know, I definitely was taught and learned throughout my life that it's important to acknowledge the land that we're on and that we give an offering and we just to give gratitude, right, for being able to be visitors in the space. And I think that it's turned into just sort of a statement, right? I make a land acknowledgement, and now I've checked that box, and so I'm okay with like all the indigenous folks. I mean, I'm okay with the native folks, and that's not what it is. I mean, to do a true land acknowledgement, you have to recognize that you are truly a visitor and behave that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to behave that way. And it also means that you have a responsibility to kind of cultural protocols as well, you know? And I think that that's what I'd like to see from government systems. You know, that's what I'd like to see from organizations and all of the folks who are grounded in this space is to really walk that talk, you know?
Yeah, I think Washington has an opportunity, or Seattle, should I say, to really kind of stand behind the things that they're saying and be more actionable, right? Like, you know, we've heard time and time again how progressive the state of Washington is, and, you know, about do-gooders and people that, you know, really want to kind of move the needle. But I think it's a timeout for all of the talking
Yeah.
at this point, and folks got to really show up and stand in those spaces. And I feel like for me right now, if you can't defend my humanity, you don't deserve my support, right?
Yeah.
So if you're not defending the humanity of Black and brown people, Native folks, if you're not making sure that we are safe, protected, acknowledged, and respected, I mean, just on a human level of just being able to stay alive, right?
Yeah.
You don't deserve our support.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember that's kind of what prompted this conversation and really wanting to go public with it. Do you remember our colleague on CBC? She was telling that story about how, you know, being in active parts of the protest
Mhm.
and people saying, you've got to get these white folks up to the front, get the white folks up to the front, you know, and she was like, what do you mean? This is our movement, right? This is our place. And then she realized that because once you got the white folks up to the front, the police brutality became lessened, and you were less likely to be pepper sprayed and all of that if you presented as white. And I remember that just really resonating with me. And that the first thing that came to mind was um, that I would do that for you,
Right.
you know?
And same. And I was really glad that that point was brought up and it was validated. But then there's also, Esther, the flip side of that. We've also
Yeah.
seen where our white allies have stepped in that space to protect our limbs or whatever. But then we also have seen some of the savagery, if that's even a word, but how savage some of these systems are, and
Yeah.
law enforcement in some aspects, around the fact that they don't care about their counterparts stepping in the way to protect us. They are willing to pepper spray a child. They are willing to
Yeah.
continue, you know, shoot rubber bullets and flash grenades and things like that. And so to me, the message that it sent was, now that we have some real allies that are willing to kind of be in the forefront and step on the front line,
Yeah.
we get to see just how deeply rooted and embedded racism is, because they're willing to let their country burn down
Yeah.
and be willing to arrest and hold people accountable for breaking the law.
Yeah.
Our lives are not worth enough to certain systems in this country to make sure that we're protected. And for the people that are willing to step in the way for us, they are willing to push them aside and treat them with the same level of treatment that we have and our ancestors have endured the entire time they've been on this planet, right? So, you know, and I think that might have been what the wake-up call was for white America, the sense of we were going through a health global pandemic, and folks literally had no choice but to sit with the murders, right? Because I know we use death and we use, you know, all these different terms, but what it is, it was murder. George Floyd was murdered. And we're in a situation where, whereas you and I have seen how this plays out in certain ways, and it's not new to us, there are people now that are being forced to sit with the fact that this is beyond anything that they can reckon with. And it's been going on for a really long time, right? And it's not a new instance. And the fact that, which is even more appalling, is since that man lost his life, there are law enforcement officers still killing people.
Yeah, that's real.
There is literally no thought or respect or regard to the lives of Black folks. And again, Native people too. Like, I do not want to leave that out of the conversation. There's no regard for our lives. The fact they didn't just think for a moment, we should take a pause because, you know, all eyes are on us. But the fact that they don't care. They just simply are showing us, right? They do not, the ones that are acting in this way are showing us that they do not care.
Yeah, that's real. I mean, the officer that killed George Floyd also killed the Native guy too, right? Those are the ways that we kind of are woven into this experience together. And I think it's important for us to have that conversation. Like, yes, this has been going on for a long time. Yes, the Black Lives Matter movement needs to stand, right, at the forefront. And it's very important for us to not engage in these, like, hierarchies of oppression, because that's really what this system was designed to do. Is once we begin pitting, you know, one another against each other, then the system is working, right? Because then, you know, all they have to do is enact violence every once in a while. Otherwise, we keep ourselves in check, you know. And I want to make sure that that's heard. Like, I wanted to have this conversation with you because right now, this is where I take a step back and I uplift you, right? There are times when you have done that for us. If I think about, you know, like Standing Rock, for example, you know, John T. Williams, when he was killed, I think if those are the same types of things that we need to show up for one another, you know, and we need to recognize that we don't have to have the conversation, well, what about us in that same moment, right? It's okay to uplift that story, knowing that we carry those same, you know, experiences, because it makes it all more powerful. It's about empathy, and it's about the ways that we are connected, you know?
I really love the way you put that, because I think that has been used as a divisive piece for communities, for Black and Brown communities for so long, like almost this, you said it way more eloquent than me, but I'm looking at it as like a tit for tat, like, but this happened to us. And at the end of the day, the level of violence and poverty and things that have been enacted towards us to keep us in a certain place in society is not a one community has been done worse than the other, but more of we have all been victimized, and we need to really all stand together and support one another, because at the end of the day, Black liberation is Native and Indigenous sovereignty, right? At the end of the day, like, Esther, I don't win unless you win. And that's my philosophy, right? Not, and I mean, but it's so embedded though and indoctrinated in me because that's the way I was raised and that's what I was around. And so I also have to kind of think of, I really feel like I was in another life a 60s baby. Like, oh gosh, some love I wish I could have been there. But I think about, there have been clues and hints that have been left along the way for us to figure out how to save us, because can't nobody else save us but us, right? And I remember when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a part of the FBI. Like I knew I was going to be like this big forensic psychologist. Like that was something that just really appealed to me. And the thing that turned me away was learning that J. Edgar Hoover, when he was asked what was the single most threat to America, do you know what his response was?
Yeah, didn't he say black man?
He said Black unity.
Black unity.
What got hung up on, Esther, was the fact that that was the clue. It was unity. It didn't matter if it was Black folks or not. It was people standing together, standing, knowing that they had the power within themselves to make change. And when you're taught literally all your life, when your history has been erased, you've been stolen from your land, the only thing that you're ever told and taught about is slavery. I had history before slavery, right? We weren't born slaves, right? We were kings and queens running continents, the whole 9 yards. And so I feel like dismantling our history, stripping us of that, taking those things away, minimizing and dehumanizing us, you know, putting in the Constitution, we weren't even 3/4 human, and think anything to diminish the power that we hold, right, has led us to the point where now we're trying to figure out, not trying, there are some really wonderful organizers and grassroots folks and people in our community that have never lost sight of that, right, and knew that day one. But there are many of us that need to be educated about those things, learn about what that means, be more confident about who we are, and be willing to, you know, in the great words of Malcolm X, to a certain degree, by any means necessary, do what we need to do to save us, right? That nobody, I don't expect for anyone else to do that for me, or even you, but I feel like community-wise, I feel like as sisters, I feel like we should be working together to make sure that not only our voices, but the voices of our people, what they're saying and what they're trying to do is elevated. And they're preserved too and protected.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was one of the first things we bonded over too, is that we have ancestors who taught us how to do this, right? We were talking about how, like, you know, yes, it was our sovereign land and our sovereign right. And that was the way that we supported folks on the Underground Railroad, right? And that's when we began to mix our communities and become one. It happened again in the 60s. Like you said, if you're a child of the 60s, I mean, you know, Black Panther Party and American Indian movement stood shoulder to shoulder and learned from one another, right, and respected and understood the value of uplifting our voices and our causes, right, because of the intersections that exist there. And I mean, there are countless other times where this has also occurred. And you know, I think about the things that have divided us since then. And of course, I mean, we're not perfect communities, right? We've definitely been infiltrated with internalized oppression, our own racism, and we've definitely heard those things happen within our tribal communities and urban areas as well. And at the same time, we have the opportunity now to really change it, you know, to truly model what that looks like. And that's what I think we're hoping from this conversation, right? Is like, what does sisterhood really look like between you and me? You know, and how can that be spread and shared throughout our communities?
Yeah, 100%. And I know something else too that I think has been ever present. I know when COVID-19 specifically broke out, my first thought was, what about tribal land? What about the Native community? What about people that are not able to get resources? And then I immediately thought about elders, right?
Yeah.
It was like, I want to be able to help, but I know that I have a compromised health system. I don't want to do anything that would jeopardize the health of someone else, right? And so you tag that with what a lot of people are actually saying now. So my parallel is, there are folks that want to be in the movement and want to march and want to protest, but also know the implications of maybe putting themselves in a position that could jeopardize folks' health. And so people are asking, you know, well, what else can I be doing? You know, if I'm not on the front lines, and if I'm not at CHOP, and if I'm not, you know, at these, you know, beautiful, much needed protests and rallies, what else can I be doing? And there's many things. And I think the conversations that we've had around having this, you know, conversation and being able to kind of share it out, I think doing things like this, I think making sure, that there's research around policy, the folks that are participating on the police commission and trying to work and respond to what's going on during the protests, right? And being able to monitor that, and making sure, that there are resources and supplies that can be given. And I think the work that people do behind the scenes is, if not just as important as the folks that are on the front line, because I feel like folks behind the scenes, we should be able to support and uplift the folks that are in the forefront, right? Like preservation of our folks, right? I think is preserving our leaders and preserving our people that are out there really fighting for us. I think is something that's really important.
I think that's important too. We saw that with, addressing missing and murdered Indigenous women, right? It was the grassroots folks who brought this to a point where systems had to be responsive, right? And then I think that it takes, those folks who do policy work and all of that, like you said, to actually make sure that if we speak that language, that we get the systems translated in their language, right? And I think that is super valuable. What I love about this movement, I'm really proud of this movement, is it was like a perfect storm. People are home from COVID. They're totally contained and in quarantine and isolated and watching this atrocity, because it cannot be hidden. This is our own, we have the technology to be able to share this broadly, and we have networks that it moves rapidly. And it was just enough. And people were saying, I know our docs here at the health board are saying, look, sometimes you have to sacrifice one organ for another. You know what I mean? And yes, we're taking risks by going out, risks to get infected with COVID. And at the same time, we cannot risk this because we'll lose our lives anyway, and so being able to provide those type of precautions and offer testing and all of that so that we can still maintain our health as a community is really important. I think you're right. And I think what's most important is that we develop like a seamless synergy, between all of our respective roles. And we say this a lot in our Native communities, that, everybody has a rightful place in their circle,
Right.
Everybody has a rightful place, and that's what that looks like. Or I think about things like the medicine wheel, and that takes us back to our indigeneity, right, where we're all connected through the land and through our blood, quite frankly, and that's what I'm hoping this continues to build, right? Is that connection, because you're right. Then that unity exists.
Mm-hmm. And I think also too, I learned a lot about the power of being siloed, moving here. And I don't want to seem like I'm like putting down the state of Washington. Like, obviously I wouldn't be here if there weren't some wonderful attributes about it, but I always want to be really clear and really honest about my stand. I was taught you could never stop learning, right? And the things that you don't know, those are the things that you want to learn about. And so when I came here under the guise of, I'm going to hone my skills, learn, absorb, and soak in what I can get here in Washington as far relative to like the work that I do. So eventually I can take that back to my community and figure out ways to help them implement some of those things there, right? And so I think something that's really important for us around the whole sisterhood and being unified is we have to have conversations and we have to build opportunities for folks to be able to connect with one another. And I think we bonded over not a reactionary situation, right? Not in a moment of crisis, but more of what are the things that we have in common. We were appointed to a position, right, to be able to help community. And it was just like, you know what, this person, I'm drawn to them. And what can I learn from them, right? Like, what can I learn from them? And then like, what can I feed into them, right? That helps strengthen and preserve them, right?
Yeah. And then you took a risk and you asked me to show up for you, right? And I took a risk because it wasn't necessarily a forum that I'm used to speaking in, right? Especially telling those personal stories of my own experiences with police violence and those types of things. And I remember you saying to me, I knew there was something, right? Like, because I know how I present in the world. We talk about this a lot too. Like how when you reach like a certain professional level, people suddenly think that you're no longer part of community or for community or whatever, forgetting that we have these life experiences that actually got us to this place that we do not forget, right? And in fact, they actually enhance our connection to community. And so that's something that I find really important. And that's something that I see in you too, is, you definitely are on this trajectory. You worked hard for your education, and that doesn't mean you've forgotten yourself, you
Right.
know. And
Right.
we take our whole selves into these forums. And you're
Mhm.
right, we bonded because we were brand new on this in these appointments, and we were like, what are we doing? But we knew one thing for sure, is that we wanted to have a better environment for our communities, and that we had responsibility to community to be there,
Mhm.
you know.
And I think too, something that we did well and we bring to the networks that we're in to Esther is the fact that we're willing to celebrate people and what they bring to the table
Right.
versus I'm going to disassociate or put this person in a particular box or a particular category, but it's more like, you bring something to this table, you bring some type of synergy, you bring, resources, you bring amazing thought process and critical analysis. And we're not going to make people feel bad or dehumanize folks because they bring different levels to the table, right? Or different
Yes.
experiences or different education. Like, I think we come from an era of you celebrate folks, right? You
Yes.
celebrate them and you honor them. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with when you know who you are, you're embedded in your own culture, and you're proud of who you are.
Yeah.
And so I think that was one of those things where I was just like, no, we're not going to tear folks down because they're an executive, right? Or,
Yeah.
maybe that their path may not have led them touched on some areas where they actually have far more to contribute than you may think they do based on the role that they currently hold. Like,
Yeah.
everybody has experiential knowledge that they bring to the table. And I think it's worth, again, hearing people out, celebrating them for who they are, and then figuring out what's the best way to utilize what this person brings to the table. I mean, that
Yeah.
literally, to me, is the only way that we're going to be successful in demanding like the changes that we need and holding folks accountable for that.
Yeah, that's real. I think another thing we move through very quickly is identifying ways that we balance one another, you
Mhm.
know? Because, I know that I could be really very in my head a lot, right? And I'm I'm analyzing constantly, and I recognize how I show up in the world. And I often tease my staff about like how I'm emotionally inept, right? And they laugh. They're like, no, you're not. But I think one of the things that you do is you really exude love and balance, and you really foster good communication and active listening. And those are things that I learn from you, and that I really lean on you for sometimes, especially because I think, especially in trauma settings, my go-to is logic. Like, it has to make sense. So I'm sitting here processing, trying to make it make sense. And you're like, girl, it's all right to feel this, And I'm just like, oh my God, or I can show up as a whole person. I'm just like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just like this queer native kid who got the hell out of Colorado Springs as fast as I could so I would stay alive. And that you felt, and you could like hold that feeling for me when I've like logicked myself out of it, right? And I've watched you do that in these very communal settings, and I admire it and respect it, right? And I also know that I can't be that because that's not who I am, but I can surround myself with folks like you who have those gifts.
And I thank you for that, and I appreciate that. I think for me, that's something that's been super innate since I was a kid, and which led me to some of the career paths that I had. Esther, I was in mental health for 20 years. So like before I was, went through the process to be trained to do that, I'd always been somebody that was real big on behavior and people's emotions and making sure folks were okay. I was the little kid in the neighborhood where I would notice like, they might not have enough to eat over there, or that baby's been in them same clothes for a couple of days. Mama, maybe we should let them come over here and wash, or, whatever. That's always, always, always been me. And it's from a genuine place, right? It's love. And that's that way for me, love and loyalty.
Yeah.
But I think where I bring that balance, I think what is supremely unique and wonderful about you and what you have taught me is just that level of like pride and systems and, you know, just knowing how to lead folks and how to bring people together, how to give people voice in the work that they're doing. I think I am in awe of you when we are in, like you said, communal spaces and you are giving people analysis of ways, but not just an analysis, but like, here's a way that we can do this. Here's how it has worked. Here's what we can do, right? Like, here are the things that we can kind of put in place. And here's how it actually benefits us, right? To be able to work through this process this particular way. And so just the level of expertise you bring to the table, I think is so appreciated, is really something that I appreciate about you. And I'm sure your community appreciates about you. And the fact that like COVID-19 hit and you all didn't miss a beat. You never shut down. You never closed. You continue to do everything that you had already done. And I think for an organization that you run and for the person that you are and the team of people that you employ, it was not a difficult shift for you all because you were so deeply embedded in the work and preserving your people that it wasn't hard to be like, we have to shift gears. This is not going to be difficult for us to transition because we stay prepared to show up for community.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I think is amazing about this? So obviously we're talking about you and me, but if I think throughout our communities, we have so much talent, so many gifts, right? And we've talked about like, what does it look like to create a forum where all those voices and all those gifts are kind of heard and where we can create real synergy around how to do things together, you know, respectfully, and not just you know, like Black and Indigenous communities, but I mean obviously all communities, that rightful place in the circle, you know. But it can start with us because it started with us to begin with, you know.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I hope that this conversation prompts many to come. Invite folks to come join us, right? Like we can invite folks, not just questions, but if you think that there are folks we should add to the forum, let's do that. But I want to continue these conversations. How do you feel?
I do too. I think we should definitely continue them. And I think it would give us a unique opportunity for folks that are hearing some of the language that's being thrown around, kind of going back to police accountability, right? I think it is such a tremendous moment for us to make sure that voices that aren't typically being heard have an opportunity to be heard, and that people that usually, again, are not invited to the table, we create the table. We create the table and allow folks to be able to ask questions and, what does this particular legislation mean, or why is that even important to us? I think creating and kind of carving out a space where it affords folks opportunities to talk, and everybody doesn't have to be an expert. That's what's so amazing. And celebrate and you honor people, and you honor folks that are in the trenches, is giving everyone an opportunity to participate, right? To participate and that we can learn from.
Like a solidarity table.
I like that. Yes.
Yes. We just host a solidarity table.
Host a solidarity table, let folks speak, find out how we can support them, what are things that we could be doing. Because I think a lot of times folks, when they hear support, they don't realize there's so many different layers to what support can look like, right? And resources. So I think even us being a resource and a support in that way, just kind of laying out what that could look like would be really too.
Just to be able to uplift voices first and then listen and then act, right? Turn it into action. Yeah, I'm with you there. Well, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate this conversation, and I'm looking forward to what comes of this, and we're doing more work with you, man. I just really love it.
Same. I'm excited. Let's bridge these gaps and let's uplift our communities and bring our folks together.
Yeah.
We've done it before, and we'll persevere in this situation as well too. But I think we have learned from all of this. The time is now for us to fight even harder and hopefully fight hand in hand.
Yeah, for sure.